right, what's up, world? It's your boy, Mike Muse. I am so excited to be in conversation with my next guest. Before I just talk about her incredible memoir and writing and being her as a journalist, why I was so excited to have her on. And this isn't about returning the favor because she's just a standalone unto herself. And so there is no favors that is needed to be indebted to her incredible discovery and her journey of self, her journey of journalism, and her incredible story about intersectionality of gender, race, class, culture. But I first met her, I did my first ever big town hall with Jamie Foxx and Michael B. Jordan, and we had a mutual friend of ours. And I had told the mutual friend that, I was looking to get some press there. I really wanted to make it big. I wasn't quite sure how, SiriusXM was going to promote it and what have you. And the mutual friend Raval, what's up, Raval? Shout out to V, connected me to Natasha, and Natasha came on behalf of, I believe, the Griot, I believe at the time, and she wrote a story, and I never forgot that. And she didn't know me, and she came and she wrote such a thoughtful piece to the interview, and she didn't know that I've always felt indebted to her, and anything she was ever going to ask me, I was always going to say yes. And so when this opportunity came across my desk, I saw her name and I literally screamed. I was like, finally, I could just do something for her that she did for me. And so without further ado, the incredible writer, journalist, incredible human being, as you can tell just by that, Natasha S. Alford. How are you, my friend?
I'm overwhelmed. I'm smiling from ear to ear. What an honor. It's so great to be on the show. And again, you're living life. You're not thinking about what's going to happen down the road. And I'm so glad that life brought us together. So thank you for having me.
It did. I always wanted to say thank you. I said thank you in the moment, but I just wanted to say thank you again publicly. Like, you just never know the little things that you do, how it can go such a long way and it can mean so much. You probably had no idea how important that interview was for me. It's to the point where I actually had that signed poster from them and actually hanging on my wall. That's the only
Wow.
memorabilia celebrity thing that I have, because that meant so much. And so having you there just means the world to me. And so since then, your journey and career has just skyrocketed. I mean, it was always blossoming and it was always there. And now you are head of the Griot's digital platform. You're the anchor of the Griot TV. You're on CNN. Can you imagine a possibility that your life would be this grand as it is? And you still have more living to do, but as this point.
I say that I'm living my dream. I'm living the life that I wanted, but it took courage and it took faith to go after that. And so much of this book is about giving people an example of what it means to walk in faith, to redefine what success is for yourself. I was on a traditional path, and I won't give away too much of the story, but had a very comfortable job and sort of the whole cubicle sort of expectation after graduating college. And I just knew I wanted more, but sometimes it is scary to risk failure or to risk being seen as not successful, right? And you have to embrace that in order to authentically live the life that you were called to live. So this is a blessing, and I feel like it's time to give the testimony of how we did this. So hopefully it encourages another generation of talented young people to just be free.
And the book that she's referencing, audience, is American Negra, a memoir by Natasha S. Alford. She is of mixed race, African-American and Puerto Rican. And so it's this wonderful, beautifully interwoven tale of both those existence. I find that interesting. I was having a conversation with a buddy of mine this morning, and we were talking about music. And we were talking about this incredible way that Latin music is coming into the States now. There's a time when artists had to speak English in order to get their songs played on the radio. But now you have Latin artists now who are literally singing in Spanish only on like pop stations here in America. So do you recognize the timeliness of your book, and what do you hope that it moderates in this incredible moment of like pop culture, Latin American meets Hispanic diaspora moment?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question about music, because if you read the book, American Negra, there's a whole section about reggaeton and about music and also about Blackness, which I think if you look at the landscape of reggaeton stars now, a lot of people would be surprised to know that reggaeton's roots are in Black culture, right? We're talking about a genre that reflects migration, Jamaican workers who were working on the Panama Canal, bringing over reggae, and then it mixing and blending and becoming this new genre of its own, and then taking off and evolving more in Puerto Rico. So I think the challenge for those of us who are racially conscious and we care about racial justice is this element of erasure of the Blackness, right? Like, why is it that so many of the reggaeton stars kind of all look the same? They all are, mestizo or lighter skinned Puerto Rican, some of them even white, right? Or not just Puerto Ricans, we've got Colombians, we've got, Latinos who sort of fit a very traditional image. And so what the book tries to do is highlight some of the Black Latin roots of reggaeton, as well as talk about what it's like to live at the intersection. For so many years, I mean, I identify myself as multi-ethnic because for Puerto Ricans, I mean, they're Black Puerto Ricans, right? And so, but sometimes we equate Puerto Ricanness or Latino-ness with being like one race. And there are actually many different races that are part of the Latino community. And so part of what the book tries to do is to highlight the Black Latinos, highlight the unique histories that we have in our various countries, and also just talk about the relationship with the African American community, right? Which, we're all often living together and creating culture together. So it's ambitious. You readers will tell me what you think about how it hits you and how it sits in your soul. But that is also part of what I am trying to do with telling the story.
Do you think that that is coming from this? I love how you're using the word erasure. I loved how you talk about the light-skinned Latinos that are trending. And the moment you said that, I was like, wow, yes, there's that one, there's this one, there's that one, there's this one, and there's not this one. And I am aware of that one, but you're not there. Is that because there is a complicated relationship with colorism within the Latino community? Do you think
Yeah,
that?
yeah. I look, none of us, us meaning this, new world, so to speak, in the Americas, have escaped the history of slavery, right? It can be hard for some people to talk about or acknowledge. Look no further than Florida and what's happening with efforts to suppress Black history. But every single piece of land has been touched by colonization. And so although slavery in Puerto Rico and slavery in the Dominican Republic had its own unique history and maybe they speak a different language, colonization and this idea of a social caste, right? Who was considered more desirable, who was considered more attractive. All of that is based on anti-Blackness. We all came from Africa, we were dropped in these different places, and that the oppression that we faced was just it manifested in its own ways in each various country. And so that erasure, I truly believe, is just part of the history, right? It's part of why, many Black Latinos are left out of commercials. It's why when you see them in movies, they don't have the main character role. Maybe they're portrayed as a maid or they're portrayed as a criminal. It's why Black Latinos are right now fighting for rights to wear their hair natural without dealing with discrimination that's happening right now in Puerto Rico. And so, what the Spanish-speaking music industry faces is very similar to the English-speaking music industry. We just saw Jay-Z at the Grammys not too long ago calling out the ways in which Black artists have been overlooked, but used for their creativity. They start the trends, but they don't get the credit. Well, the same thing is happening in the Spanish-speaking realm of music. And so with this awareness, we can educate, we can change course, right? We can correct the things that are wrong, but we can't address the problem if we are willing to acknowledge it or have the uncomfortable conversations. And so, again, this is part of what I'm trying to do, but doing it in a storytelling way, which hopefully opens people's hearts and minds to be open to what is a lived experience. And from there, to kind of draw their own conclusions.
I like how you put in the book, you talk about how African American communities and Latin communities were living next to each other, right? And literally in the same communities, in the same neighborhoods. And I love how you use a question of, aren't we having shared experiences, right? Or how can we have these overlapping moments and not recognize the connectivity to that? And that made me think about in the comment you just said, because I often think about like the way that Spanish music is right now and Bad Bunnies of the world, right? There is this almost a disassociation with hip hop, right? In the sense of the way that we know American hip hop to be. But we all know that reggaeton is just a derivative of hip hop. It's like a subcategory of hip hop, right? And they even use the words like trap Latin music. But I'm like, that's just trap hip hop, right? But it's like they don't want to use the words or association, right? As if it's a separate thing. And I've always thought that. I'm curious because I grew up in Lansing, Michigan. You grew up in Syracuse. Obviously, Lansing and Syracuse are somewhat different, but somewhat similar, right? Like in the sense of social economic backgrounds and looks. And I really didn't get experience into different races and colorism until I went to college, right? And so I'm wondering with you about when did you, although I know you're talking the book when you're going back to Puerto Rico, you were darker than your cousin, so you may have had a different moment. So I'm curious, I am going to come back to the music landscape because I
Oh, for
think
sure.
it's
Yeah.
intersect this conversation. But I'm wondering, when did you recognize like colorism, like within your space, like born and raised in Syracuse? I feel like sometimes we're protected in this incubator space of community.
Yeah.
We start broadening it out.
Yeah, so well, my readers, when you get into, there's a certain chapter, I won't give the full story away, but essentially, growing up in upstate New York, things are very black and white. Okay, this is not like New York City, the melting pot, where you have, black people from across the world and you're hearing all these languages. I mean, there is a subset of that, but it's pretty much, hey, are you black and are you white? And so for me, growing up as a Puerto Rican and African American girl, there were certainly questions and people who wondered what I was, but I ultimately fell into the category of Black. That was how people saw me. And it was in that upstate segregated North. That's really when I understood race. It was looking at my neighborhood and saying, how come all the Black people, like, how come we live in the neighborhood where our houses like aren't as big, or our lawns aren't as big, or our schools look a little bit older, but when you drive out to the suburbs, it looks completely different. So I was seeing it through this intersection of race and class together, and the ways in which segregation in the North really, really functions in this like subtle way. You may not see a, colored only sign at a certain point. Oh, they certainly existed at one point. Maybe those signs went away a little bit earlier on the timeline, but it was still very clear that Black people stay over here and white people stay over there. And so I was an observant child. I saw these things and I brought these questions to my parents. And fortunately, my dad was really straight up with me. Okay. My dad was, child of the civil rights movement, born in 1957, went to some segregated elementary schools, was the first to integrate his elementary school, and remembered white parents standing on the side of the street screaming at him, this small child just trying to go to school. So he never lied to me about these things. He told me about, being punched in the face by a police officer who called him the N-word and told him to never come back to that neighborhood, right? This happened in the North. So the consciousness of racism was always there. I think when it came to my Latina identity, understanding that it was also in the Latino community, even though Latinos face discrimination of their own, right? For whether it be for language or being racialized as somehow other, that even within our own community, we had this colorism of, lighter sort of being supposedly better or having more representation, and Blackness sort of being put on the bottom of the totem pole. And so the book explores my trying to understand that. What is at the root of that? Understanding the parallels with African Americans and what Black Latinos were facing. And it's really been eye-opening for me. And I hope it's something that helps us to better talk about our relationships as a community.
Did you, so I'm curious though about like the colorism aspect of it. in terms
Mhm.
of like when did that come in? I love how you are distinguishing colorism versus racism, right?
Oh,
Because
yeah,
those
yeah,
are two separate distinct things.
they are.
I am going to go on a journey with this because so growing up in Lansing, the census is different now, but growing up, it was 60-40, 60% white, 40% black.
Mhm.
And you weren't any other blackness, right? You were just black, right? And although we knew we were different, but we never felt like we were the minority, right? Because it was enough of a minority majority, right? We didn't feel like whites was dominant. But it really wasn't until I went to college that I understood like colorism and in context of race differently through the lens of colorism. And so for me, it was colorism first, then racism second, but it's all started in college. And then when I came to New York, Natasha, and this I was connecting the dots with Latino culture and music and dark skin versus light skin. I was in a cab and I met this Dominican brother, and I just knew he was black. And for me, I didn't understand Dominican because I'd never experienced Dominican culture because I'm the state of Michigan. We didn't have.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, yeah, you're black. And he was like, no, I'm not. I'm like, yes, you are. And I was like, but you're like more, your hue is darker than mine, right? And he swore up and down he was not black. And in that moment, that is when I recognize the dynamic of the Latin diaspora when it comes to dark, light, colorism,
Mm.
racism, disassociation, disconnecting from the African diaspora, reggaeton disconnecting like from hip hop as a general from the South Bronx, right? And kind of like where we are now with that.
So it's so fascinating. I did some research for the book, obviously, to better understand my experiences. And that response of rejecting one's own Blackness, some of this is by design, right? There are certain countries in which elite groups um, purposefully said, we are Hispanic. We're going to emphasize our Hispanic European roots because that is the supposedly more elevated culture than the African. And so they made that a part of sort of the national story. They celebrated the Hispanic heroes. They emphasized Hispanicity over Blackness. And so you have people who may be the same color as you and I, Mike. I mean, look, you could drop us in DR right now and people would think we were Dominican, okay?
Literally.
Literally, but they have been told a different story about who they are. Now, what I always also emphasize is that there are also people who always have known that they were Black and have always embraced it. And they actually still, they have practices and aspects of culture that come directly from Africa, right? In a way that, as an African American, like I feel like I had to dig and sort of find more understanding of my African roots. Whereas when I go to Puerto Rico and I'm doing bomba dancing, for example, or
Yes.
listening, to bomba and plena, like I hear those African rhythms and it's very pronounced and the clothes that we wear. So it's obviously present in both cultures, but the point is that there are people who understand it and there are
Mm.
people who have been fed a propaganda to deny it.
Yeah.
And the colorism is supported by media. It's supported by erasure. And so if you erase those who are darker, you send this message that they are not worthy to be seen, that they are not the legitimate Latinos, right? The real ones. And so that is so important to understanding some of the stratification that we see. But honestly, it's all connected. I say it all goes back to the transatlantic slave trade, us being dropped in these different places, and the perniciousness of racism and the colorism that derived from that. But I mean, I learned colorism also being African American because I remember, the light-skinned African American girls were considered pretty, right? They got all the attention. I'm brown. I'm like a medium brown. And I understood where I sat on the sort of color spectrum. And it
Yeah.
was always my lighter skinned friend. She had permed hair, long hair. She always got the attention when we got out. So it's just something that is a tragedy. But in each of our communities, each of our Black communities, we find ways to, or we've been taught ways to separate ourselves and to
Isn't
sort
that
of,
fascinating?
create a caste system. And we have to break free of it.
We do. First of all, I want you to explain what Bombas is before I go to cast, because it might have been overlooked just a little bit. I went to
Yeah.
Puerto Rico for the first time a few months ago, and I got introduced to the Bomba dance culture and community, and it was amazing. So if you can just highlight a little bit of what that is, and then I'm gonna go back to this cast system. I think it's
Of
important for people
course.
to know that exists. I didn't know it.
Well, I just want your listeners to imagine flowing skirts and a large African drum, and in the middle is a drummer, and he is speaking to the dancers with these rhythms, and the dancers are responding with their skirts, shaking their shoulders, and it's an improvisational dance that is inspired and comes from Africa. And when there were Black Puerto Ricans who broke free of slavery, they revolted, they escaped, they created their own communities. They were called cimarrones. And in these cimarrone, communities, bomba was practiced. It was just part of the culture and tradition. Sometimes bomba was used to communicate that a revolt was going to happen, right? It was a way of talking to each other about how they would organize and how they would plan. And so this is part of the culture of Puerto Rico, and it is now, being more elevated and more respected as a part of the entire culture, and not just sort of, oh, these are what the Black Puerto Ricans do. It is revered in that way. So if you go to Puerto Rico, chances are you're going to see or hear bomba somewhere on your visit.
I had an amazing experience with these Bamba dancers and drummers. So I just wanted to just really highlight that, because I think that's another thing that doesn't really get discussed a lot. Like when we travel, we think about like these Latin countries and Latino countries, that we don't think about like centering the African diaspora, right?
Mhm.
Like even when I went to Colombia, I started seeing more poignant moments of the African diaspora that isn't highlighted in the tourism travel brochures, right? That you see. The more that we're talking, audience, I hope you understand the importance of why it was important for Natasha to write this book, because it's just showing the incredible multi-layered world that we exist in within community, right? And how these complicated systems of, I love how you ended, Natasha, with caste, right? Like how is it, we never think about caste in America, right? We always look at things from like class and race, but not often caste doesn't get kind of spoken into it. We always think about some of those countries over there, but it's also true here, within our space. What was there a moment? I'm just curious. Were you driving down the street, were you in the shower, were you eating your lunch, and it was like, I gotta write this book? Like, was there an experience or a moment that said, I need to put pen to paper to help society moderate this incredible, complicated, nuanced system that we're all existing in?
It started with an op-ed for the New York Times. I was trying to think of an op-ed. I'd gone to an op-ed writing workshop through the op-ed project, and their goal is to get women to write more op-eds because we're often underrepresented on these editorial pages. And I just thought about what has been the core question of my entire life. I've spent my entire life meditating on this, the what are you? Right? I mean, I always have known that I was Black, but I knew that there was something unique about this intersection that I sat at. And so I decided to write an op-ed. And as I'm writing the op-ed, I'm like, this is a book. This is a book. Now, I always knew I would write a book. I think if you are a reader and you love to read, there's chances are you're going to want to write too. It's kind of just part of the deal of loving words and understanding the importance of stories. And I always felt that my story, my intersection, I hadn't seen it anywhere. I hadn't seen it in books, and therefore it's almost invalidating. You say nobody wrote about this, nobody wrote about it, what it was like to live at this intersection. This has to exist in the world for someone who lives there, but also for someone who doesn't live at that intersection to understand how we got here. And so between the op-ed and the desire to write a book, just a lot of intention went into working on this story. And over the course of 3 years, I like really actively worked on it. I had just had my son. I was on maternity leave
Um,
as I met this agent and told her about the idea. And so the book is as old as my son is. He's about to turn 3. So these are my 2 babies now.
you have two children, Natasha.
Yes, yes,
Um,
yes. Yes,
What
yes.
do you think? It's so funny. I was Ava DuVernay's with her new film Origin. She talks about Origin being a political movie. And so, knowing that you do political commentary on CNN, make sure you tune in, folks. Knowing you're anchoring Real TV, make sure you tune in, folks. Do you see this book as political?
Yes, I do. I do see it as political in the sense that the way that we're talking about Black communities and these, the so-called Black vote, right? And the so-called Latino vote is an oversimplification. We're missing an opportunity to reach people who are at the intersections, but also to complicate our notion of what people want. When people hear these headlines that Latinos are going for Trump, well, what does that mean? Which Latinos, right? From which countries? What are their interests? What is their income level? Right? All of these things matter. And so in trying to make sense of the world, this is why we have categories. It allows us to process large amounts of information and try to find patterns and try to, again, find meaning in it. We have oversimplified some stories. And that applies to the Black community as well, because within the Black community, you are seeing movements where people are saying, my Black experience is different from yours, right? Or, Black immigrants versus Black Americans who maybe have descended from slavery here in this country, may have different political views, may have different experiences. African Americans are often sort of positioned in conflict sometimes with Black immigrants, stereotyped, treated as if we are the worst of the worst in terms of, what Black communities have to offer in the United States. Those tensions exist. And so if politicians are not speaking to those differences, and if they're not figuring out how to create coalitions, they're going to miss out come November, and they're not going to get the outcome that they expect. So the hope is that this adds some nuance to that conversation. Even if I'm telling my story, you'll find lots of history here that hopefully helps to expand that larger political conversation.
Natasha, I couldn't think of a better way to end on that note. That was such a perfectly well said, and gives us hope to understand nuance. And I think even if you're not a politician audience, as you're listening and as you're going to go buy this book, wherever bookstores can be, wherever you buy your books, February 27th, just know that you would learn when we do, put the journalist hat on really quickly, when we discuss divisions and groups and classes of what these elected officials are vying for, you also too now will have more of an understanding. My audience already knows, but now you have more of a nuanced understanding, particularly of these two worlds and an overlap within it. Please make sure you go get Natasha S. Alford's book, American Negra. Natasha, thank you so much. This was such a treat. I just love you. I'm such a fan of you. I'm so proud of you. And I hope we do more stuff together, friend.
I adore you too, Mike. We could have talked for like hours more, but this is just the beginning. Thank you to your listeners for tuning in, and thank you so much for the conversation.
Thank you so much. All right, audience, thank you. See you next week. Peace.